Alright, welcome back to the Roommate Humanities vlog. This is, I believe, the final installment of my fantasy glossary, and that's exciting. We're going to start today with the letter U, and my only item is unicorn. Now, a unicorn is, of course, a horse that has a single magical horn rising out of its forehead. It is my favorite of all of the mythical creatures, of course, seeing as it's the one that people seem to insist actually existed. Like, I love it when people tell the Noah's Ark story and, like, feature the unicorn somewhere in the piece. I think it's wonderful. So typically unicorns have this kind of connection with young girls specifically. In a lot of stories, if a boy or a man attempts to approach a unicorn, he will be attacked by it or it will flee, but a young girl has the ability to befriend it. I don't exactly know what's going on there. Next up, I have V for vial, and I think this plays into potions and poisons and whatnot. There is that amazing scene, or amazing piece of The Lord of the Rings, where Frodo is given the vial, or I guess they call it a fiel of Galadriel, but it's essentially a small glass thing that he wears around his neck, and it contains, like, the light. Next up, I have W, and this is where things start getting a little crazy. So there are three items under W that we really need to pay attention to, and those are wizard, witch, and warlock. And those are all really, really big and very, very similar. Okay, so let's start with wizard. Your wizard is a magic practitioner. They tend to come in a lot of shapes and sizes. Either they have their power innately, or they've earned their power by doing something, like it's been gifted to them by some sort of a magical entity, or they have learned their powers through years and years of study. And you also tend to get things in little mixed proportions. You know, like you get people who studied really, really hard, but started with like a little bit of magic power in them anyhow. Like maybe they're half elf or something. I mean, wizards are like the cornerstone of fantasy. They're like they're the bedrock of fantasy. Like if you have a world with magic that occurs, you have wizards who can control that magic. Um, they can be protagonists, but they make helpers. They're helpers better than anything else. The most famous helper, of course, being Merlin, and we're never really sure if Merlin is exactly good or not. He does a lot of good things, like helping Arthur take his throne, but he also does a lot of bad things, like helping Uther Pendragon to steal Igraine from her husband. So we don't really know, but we do know that he has this better understanding of the world than we do. He has this forbidden knowledge, and because of this, he makes decisions differently than we do. Like we make decisions based upon morality, he makes decisions based upon, I don't know, his mystic knowledge of the future. My favorite Merlin stories are the ones that depict him as living backward through time. Okay, now then we get to witch. Now, a lot of, especially in Harry Potter, you get this idea of a witch being a female form of a wizard, like gentlemen are wizards and ladies are witches, and that's just how it goes. Um, but that isn't necessarily the traditional view. I mean, the idea of a witch who lives in a cottage in the woods and who eats children, I think, is much stronger. Like, that's much older in fantasy, and I think it has a better hold. The green-faced witch from The Wizard of Oz leaps to mind, of course. Um, this is all, I feel, fairly moot, of course, because witches are actually like a real world thing. Like Wicca is a religion. So it's a little weird that we include them as elements of fantasy. Don't you think? I mean, it would be as though like Buddhists were like a part of fantasy. Like, they're so weird and magical, those Buddhists. Um, yeah, I don't know why it's okay to like treat witches like that in fantasy. Which, I mean, there's a lot more there to talk about. There's cursing, there's hexes, there's cauldrons, there's sorceresses and newts and whatnot and transformations, but I kind of feel like we've touched upon that elsewhere. Which brings us to warlock. Now, classically speaking, a warlock is actually the male form of a witch. But in fantasy, you definitely get a sense of the warlock as being somebody who's made some sort of infernal or evil bargain to accomplish their power. They've absolutely sold their soul. They've absolutely allowed something evil to come live inside of them. And the reward for doing this is untold power. Where wizards are often neutral and witches are typically evil, with the power, with the potential to be good sometimes, or neutral. Warlocks are generally always evil. I don't know if I've ever seen a warlock that wasn't evil. Like, it might even be like the definition of a warlock. And that's 5 minutes. I would like to leave on Y, though, because Y is my last letter. And Y is Yoda. Yoda. I know, right? Yoda. That's sci-fi, right? Like, they got spaceships and lightsabers and whatnot. But here's, I think, the distinction between sci-fi and fantasy. I think science fiction asks, like, what might life be like if we had different technology than we do now? And fantasy just says, wouldn't it be really cool if, or what if, like, these things were like this instead of the way they are? So, I mean, they're in the same tent. No confusion there. But I don't think Star Wars ever asks us if we'd live differently if we had lightsabers. You know, like, I don't think at any point does our relationship with aliens in a possible future get discussed in any meaningful way in Star Wars, which is why I really like when people call Star Wars science fantasy. That's an extra minute, but I feel like Yoda deserved it. That said, of all Star Wars, I think Yoda is the most clearly fantasy of any of it. I mean, he's this little green man with hairy ears, and he casts magic spells. Yoda is fantasy. Anyhow, this has been a lot of fun, and it's taken a long time, but I hope you've enjoyed it. Anyhow, next time, I'm hoping to talk about Google+. Toodles.